With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome to Heard Tell. Okay, we talk about hard, tough stuff here. When we do it, we get knowledgeable guests. He's one of our favorites. He is a trusted confidant on many things offline. We're going to talk about this real hard one online. We're going to talk about this John Fetterman, Mehmet Oz situation. He is the independence man in Congress. He is a published author of We Are Not Broken. Great book on autism. If you haven't got it yet, pause this, go over to Amazon, order it real quick, read that thing. It is an outstanding book. The new version's coming out. Eric Garcia, how are you, my friend?
Doing okay. Thank you. How you doing?
I'd rather not talk about it. Let me just summarize this situation. I hate how this primary is played out. I hate how the people backing these two candidates have conducted themselves. I don't like how the candidates themselves have conducted themselves. I don't like the situation. I didn't like the debate. I didn't like how it was handled. I really didn't like the reaction to it. I hate everything about this situation. Did I accurately summarize the situation as we see it with the U.S. Senate Pennsylvania race?
So let's put some things out there. I think that already this was going to the reason why so many people with disabilities had a visceral reaction to the way the commentators did is because they'd already framed closed captioning in a really bad way. Plenty of people, literally, I was at Vanderbilt University 2 weeks ago. That was when I got on. That was I was giving a presentation and it had closed captioning because there are some people with developmental disabilities. So I think that there was already that framing that made things rough. I think the other thing is that this is a community that has historically not been treated that well by the press. So let's get that out of the way. Second, I think that the press did a lot of terrible things, covers disability pretty terribly, I'd argue, because if you remember, any time that, and my friend Rebecca Coakley always says this, anytime Trump did anything bad, they would say, oh, he can't drink water the right way, or he can't go down the stairs, when like plenty of people with disabilities do that. So let's just let's put that out there. Let's also talk about the fact that the way that the moderators talked about disability wasn't necessarily the best, talked about closed captioning wasn't necessarily the best. And then let's also just talk about how Fetterman was in a lose-lose situation regardless, because there would be people who would always judge him if he went on into the debate, and there would be people who would judge him if he was not on the if he skipped it. And let's also talk about the fact that Oz was not, it's really, I understand, and this is why I say this, is that debates are inherently, like, I think that in a lot of ways, debates just are a bad medium for people to make their decisions. And most people have already made their decisions already by the time debates happen. But Oz, while many people had concerns after the Fetterman debate, while many people in the Democratic Party and even a lot of Republicans, Oz didn't do that great in the debate either. That clip about him on abortion, and he came off as a little snide, and he dodged a lot of questions. So let's put all those things out there. This is not a good situation at all.
No, and I'm going to set some parameters real quick, because you and me talk all the time, so we don't need it. But for the audience, we're not going to do any diagnosing of medical conditions here.
That is not,
because we don't know how to do that. He had a stroke. We're going to leave it at that. You want to go do WebMD on your own time, you can do that. We're not going to do that. That's not what we're going to do here. Well, everything that Eric just said really didn't have anything to do with Fetterman himself and his performance. That's just background stuff of why people with disabilities. And we're going to touch on that in a minute, because Fetterman's getting avatared and that needs to be dealt with too. So we're going to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But we're not going to do diagnosis. We're not going to get into that sort of stuff.
Yeah. It'd be malpractice to do otherwise.
No, because no, and Oz is he's a charlatan, but he is a doctor. So, let me lay something on the table right up front where I'm coming from, because bias is on the table. We know you've written extensively about disabilities. It's a community you are not only covering, but also a part of.
Yes.
That's your biases. Here's my biases. Before anybody wants to know, because I don't talk about this a whole lot, I've had a TBI. Okay.
Yes.
So people are like, well, you don't know what it's like. Yeah, I kind of do, because I remember walking into work after 3 weeks off with half my face drawn up and full right side paralysis with my arm across my chest with that stupid little squeeze ball for weeks and weeks and weeks until I did
Yeah.
enough rehab to get my arm straightened back out. And I remember the look on and I'm the supervisor, I'm the boss, right? I remember the look on these 18, 19-year-old kids' face with my face all drawn tight, and I can't talk right because I'm talking out of the side of my mouth. I'm doing OT, I'm doing PT. Look, yeah, I've been there. Okay. So I can at least empathize, sympathize, whatever term you want to be in. It
Yeah.
sucks when you
Yes.
can't talk correctly and everybody's looking at you like you're a freak and there's nothing you can do about it because something in your brain went wrong because of, in my case, it was previous trauma. And then they probably had some kind of a situation that made it worse that they're not sure of, but that's a long story for another day. So those are the biases on the table. I know what it's like to stand there and everybody stare at you. Yes, I've done that. Okay.
Yes.
Here's the whole thing that I want to start with him. Let's go in chronological order because there's a lot of mess here.
There is.
So 3 days before the primary.
Yeah, like 2-3 days before the primary.
Back in May, Fetterman basically disappears. Turns out he's in the hospital, and then they announced that he had a stroke. You already touched on it, so I just want to start right there. I understand it's a political campaign.
Yes.
The way they addressed it, the way they slow rolled it out, the way they tried to control the information, combined with the way it was covered by the news media, this was a mess from the very, very go, including because it was 2 days before a primary. And by the way, he was winning by a ton, so that may or may not have had a lot to do with it.
Yeah. So
this was bad from the go.
This was bad from the go. So, like, as soon as the debate started, I don't know if you saw, but Connor Lamb started trending because Connor Lamb background was one of his opponents. That is a red herring because Lamb was already not going to win that primary just because he was a congressman and Fetterman was a statewide elected official. So, and Fetterman, it's important to remember, during the 2020 elections was on TV all the time, pushing back on Trump's BS on the elections. So he just naturally had a lot more recognition. Name ID. And that, as we know, name ID, as much as people don't like it, name ID means you have an advantage. Then, and by this point, people already had made up their mind. And then, they were not openly transparent about it. Obviously, there was the report later that he hadn't gone to the doctor in a long time, in a long time before. That came out, I think a month after.
Let's pause here real quick. He's 6'8". He has been very public about fighting his weight. Again, we're not going to diagnose. This is just, we're going to stick to stuff that's reported and that we see with our own eyes. He's been public about it. He's talked about it. He lost something like 150 pounds prior to this campaign. He had gotten up to 400-ish, but he's like 6'8". He's a huge dude.
He is.
So weight and health, when he's talking about this is something he's talked about consistently. So I just want to make sure that gets out there.
Let's put that out there. Yes. So this was something that was already going to be that animated the entire summer because he really wasn't on the trail until I think August was his first in-person event. So that was so this was already, so this animated how the campaign was already going to be. And at the same time, there was already, I think, what happened is during the summer, Fetterman just barraged and battered up Oz and ran up his unfavorables. So I think that there was almost an impulse by, and I don't want to blame the press, but I think the Pennsylvania political press needed to do something to rediscuss and talk about his vulnerables and his downsides. And I think Oz needed an antidote, so to speak. And I think that was when you saw his campaign saying if John Fetterman had ever eaten a vegetable, he wouldn't have had a stroke. That was when they did we'll pay for his medical personnel. That was them trying to go for the throat because Fetterman had just been merciless with him throughout the summer. And also Oz got, unlike Fetterman, Oz got bloodied up throughout the primary between Dave McCormick and Kathy Barnett. So let's put that all out there. That's the background and the context for why this became such an intensely personal and vicious.
Yeah, Eric Garcia covers Congress for the Independent. Look, things do not happen in a vacuum. And part of the problem with the disability stuff and the debate stuff is everybody just grabbed it in a vacuum and didn't do all the background on it. So that's why we're taking time to walk through all this.
Yes.
Okay. It's one of our founding principles on this show. Things do not happen in a vacuum.
No.
So you get to the debate. I'm just going to go there with it because let's be honest. I've got my own health issues. Hell, I'm going to Duke today.
Yeah.
Okay. So as soon as I'm done with you, I'm getting in the car.
Yeah.
When you have disabilities or health issues or whatever, your caregivers and your healthcare workers and the people around you are supremely important.
Yes.
Is there any version of this story with Fetterman where his team, his handlers, his caregivers, whoever, and I'm not touching this wife stuff, y'all do that on your own time. Is there any version of this where his healthcare team and his handlers have not let him down?
I think that there are some scenarios, but I think that regardless, I don't think that there was any way. So this is, I was talking about this with Meredith Shiner, who used to be a congressional reporter, now she's in PR. She's a roll caller like I was. The real thing that more than anything got me was that they clearly tried to make him have quote unquote zingers. And this is why I don't like debates, because they're all about zingers and sound bites. Him doing the Oz rule thing was that was clearly them trying to show that, hey, he can do the kind of dog and pony show that debates are, rather than just letting him speak from the heart and speak honestly, openly, and candidly. So when that happened, I think that was how his team, more than the disability stuff, more than allowing him to go on stage, things like that, I think that by having him I think that instead of readjusting the expectations and showing, because like even in the primary debates, and it was interesting, is that his team actually put out a memo. I don't know if you saw this, but like they put out a memo like literally before. They said this isn't his strong suit. Even in the debates before he had a stroke in the primary, he wasn't that great. And it's true. They like Lamb and Malcolm Kenyatta clobbered him in the debates, particularly about the shotgun stuff. I think that it was a mistake to make him do normal things that candidates do, rather than show that candidates with disabilities campaign differently. And I don't want to say, because I don't like the idea of voters just having sympathy for people because they have a disability, because oftentimes that turns into pity. But I think that there was a way to show, just to have him speak candidly instead of just sticking to his talking points, which then made it look like it was forced. So I think that's where I think he was ill-served, was by forcing him to do talking points, talking about the Oz rule, or talking about swiping like an oil company that he doesn't swipe right on, or something like that. I think that was the real mistake, was making him do the dog and pony show, which just looked really difficult, rather than just letting him speak candidly.
Yeah, Eric Garcia, the Independent, joining us, author. Gets to the heart of this whole thing and why this got so messy on social media, and it's why the disability community reacted so strong, and it's why the political press reacted so strong. Almost everyone, and I'm going to broad brush this because I think everybody's got a little bit of hypocrisy here one way or the other, and everybody's got their biases. Everybody wants it both ways with this thing. Yes. They want to say, okay, he's got disabilities, we need to respect the disabilities, but you just said it. They turn around and try to make him do a dog and pony show at the same time. They didn't set him up to go, okay, here's his needs, and we need this accommodation, and then sticking to it, and then turning around. By the way, his team after that was horrific. His campaign manager ought to have been fired on the spot for the spot he did. I don't know if you saw that or not.
Yeah, his
gets up and starts dropping. He stops dropping the F-bomb. Like, what are you doing? But this gets to the core of this whole issue, because people with disabilities want respect and accommodation.
Yes.
Where's those lines? And these are somewhat rhetorical questions, because society will always wrangle with these. Okay, we're going to give you accommodations. We're going to give you respect. When can we start judging you on your actions after we give you accommodations and respect? Yeah. How do we judge your actions in asking for those? How do we, measure you? Look, this is a political contest for a high office in the country. How do we measure your performance and factor that in. These are all those sticky questions we're skipping over because we want to yell terms and buzzwords at each other on social media, and we don't want to deal with it. And I understand the frustration of the disability community because they're watching this happen again and again and again. This is just a really loud version of it.
Yes.
That's really the core of all this, and really don't have anything to do with the politics of it.
It doesn't have anything to do with, so yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that it doesn't really have a lot to do with Fetterman. It has to do with the fact that people with disabilities have not had the best media coverage, and a lot of that is due to the fact that there really isn't a lot of there are a lot of people with disabilities. By the way, Amanda Morris at the Washington Post, she literally just had a piece that came out this morning. I suggest everybody read it and everybody follow her at Amanda.
It's on our stack. We're actually going to already link to that, so that'll be in the show notes linked.
Yeah. So and Amanda is a child of deaf parents and a hard of hearing herself. So like, go read Amanda because she actually did the hard reporting for this. So to your point about judging him on his merits, a lot of people talked about the fracking part of the debate and the fact that people were worried because of the disability. I actually had a different take on that, which was that wasn't a problem with his stroke. That was a problem of him flip-flopping. And that's where you judge him on the merits, is that he didn't have a good answer about previously disliking fracking and then flipping. That is something, to me, at least, where it is totally fair to judge him on the merits, because just like any other politician, he didn't have a good defense of it. So let's set aside, because again, but you could see that instead of his team letting him speak just candidly or try to find his own way around talking about it, but really there isn't any really way to talk about it because the fact that he did change his position, they tried to make him do talking points rather than accommodate him. I think his team did. So I think that's the real thing, is that the fracking part was difficult because it was not anything to do with his disability. It was just the fact that he was being hypocritical. So like when we talk about judging him on his merits, that's an example where you could judge him on his merits. Him interrupting Oz during Oz's closing remarks, that has nothing to do with his disability. If you interrupt somebody during your closing remarks, you kind of come off as kind of gruff, you know? So I think that's where I kind of drew the line in my mind, is that I was very much, and then again, it was him going back to the Oz rule. And I generally just don't like buzz slogans or things like that. So take that into account. There was, instead of just doing this rehearsed pablum, he could have talked about the issues in ways that were adaptable to him. The big problem I have was that his team didn't. So like, I'll give you an example. When I was following around Senator Tammy Duckworth and Senator Mark Kirk, because a lot of people were saying, oh, well, Mark Kirk wasn't treated that fairly in the press. He was. Like, I treated like a lot of people, he was out for a while and, it wasn't really made as a big issue,
Cover the backstory though there. He had a, was it a cerebral hemorrhage? I can't remember, but he had to have brain surgery, like skull off brain surgery. Very serious. And Tammy Duckworth, of course, is a combat wounded vet who has multiple amputations and is most of the time in the wheelchair, although she also uses prosthetics. So just full coverage of what that is.
Yeah, full background for that. One of the things that I was really adamant about when I was working at Roll Call and I covered that is that I said that candidates with disabilities are going to campaign differently. There is, incidentally enough, and this is a tangent, but I think this is interesting, is that there's a book called Enabling Acts by Leonard Davis that talks about the 1988 campaign, touches on it a little bit. And what's interesting is some people in Dole's campaign, in the Bush-Dole primary, speculated that when George H.W. Bush shoveled snow in New Hampshire, that was seen as like, oh, he could do that when Bob Dole couldn't because of his injuries. So I think that what was different is that they didn't say, is that because Fetterman did have a point where he said, I've campaigned in front of rallies and I show that I can do that. I think that what they should have said, and they should have framed it differently, is that I'm not going to, I can't do the whole, pablum kabuki theater that we often have, that campaigns often require. But that doesn't mean I can't do the job. That doesn't mean with closed captioning I can't be on the Senate floor and cast the votes. They didn't. What they needed to do and what they needed to show was that people with disabilities can do the job. I would have loved to have seen him say, yeah, with closed captioning, I can hear what's going on the floor. With all these things, like I can do the job, and because I've seen people do it. I've seen people with devices on, with that do closed captioning on their phone. They didn't address that. Instead, they just said, I had a stroke. They tried to address it right. I get why they did it right at the front, rather than being adamant, even when Fetterman, even when Oz got really vicious, they didn't go back to that, and they didn't reassure people, because I think that what needs to happen is that people with disabilities should set, we need to change how we process communication, and recognize that just the way that people, because I've talked to plenty of non-speaking people with disabilities, and obviously they can be very, very intelligent, more intelligent than I am. And then on the other end, I think that what needed to happen was his campaign really didn't go on the out front. By them lowering the bar, that was the soft bigotry of low expectations, rather than saying he's gonna debate differently.
Yeah, and this Eric Garcia joining. This is what really upset me about this. And again, I can care less about the politics. I think Mehmet Oz is unfit for office on a couple levels. His Turkish ties, he has no qualifications. He's a charlatan. But I'm not even talking about the politics of all this. Here, this is what upset me is, okay, I agree with everything you just said, but his campaign has tried to soft pedal this from the go, and I kind of get that. But they want to downplay it on the one hand, then they turn around on the other hand and go, well, he needs accommodations. But then they turn around and try to make him do the dog and pony show anyway, after saying they're not going to do the dog and pony show. That's the exact treat. That's why the disability community gets so upset, is like they're watching in real time the mouth and the actions and the words and the handlers and the person with the disability. That's just replay to so many of those folks, because they're just watching in real time what happens all the time of, we're going to say one thing and then we're going to demand you do the other.
Yeah.
And we just watch that on television, and everybody, and because it's a political contest, like, oh, he did horrible in the debate. And I'm sitting there go like, no, his people didn't. Why do you put him in a position to fail like that? And it's not a political thing. It really is. It's like, why is anybody doing this? Yeah, this had like 6 steps that should have stopped short before anything got to this.
Yeah, you can tell. Like, I mean, I think that from what I so this is just from what I understand, is that like I've tried to figure out whether he's actually, because, like, I should say Pennsylvania, and because I wrote about, I actually went to Western Pennsylvania in my book, to travel for my book, and Western Pennsylvania has the first openly autistic state legislator, Jessica Benham, who is who everybody keep your eye on Jessica Benham, because she's going to go just, I'm not saying that just because I'm autistic, but she's going to be going places. Pennsylvania has a history on disability. The great Dick Thornburg, who was Attorney General during the Bush administration, during George H.W. Bush's administration, was a big advocate on this. Tom Ridge, a former governor of Pennsylvania, was also big, and he now works a lot on ending some minimum wage labor. There is a history in Pennsylvania on disability rights. Bob Casey is probably one of the best senators on disability, knowledgeable on disability rights. I think that what they didn't do is that, like, what a lot of people don't know is that the Philadelphia, and I'm sorry, I know that this is a tangent, but like this is important. The Philadelphia Eagles, what a lot of people don't recognize is the Philadelphia Eagles have a sensory-friendly room for autistic young people who want to go watch Philadelphia Eagles games. Now, I would like it for there to be sensory-friendly for adults too, not just for kids, because I think that we tend to think of it just as for kids. But the fact that, so there is like, Pennsylvania is one of those states where there is that knowledge. It's not like a lot of states where there isn't that, context and familiarity. Instead, what they did is that they framed, that memo that they did framed it as, oh, well, he's not a good debater to begin with. And they put the closed captioning, and this is very granular, they put the closed captioning part in their memo, setting expectations way at the bottom, when they should have put it even at the middle or the top, and said, this is how to cover it. This is what, and you could tell that they didn't necessarily even consult with people with disability rights activists, or just, and there are plenty of them in Pennsylvania, for how to contextualize it. So that was the thing, is that there was very, very little, there wasn't the right reframing to begin with. And you can tell the Fetterman campaign didn't think about the disability part. And that I think was frustrating, because then I think for a lot of people, disability rights activists, because then they felt like they had to, and I'm sure there are plenty of people with disabilities who would have liked to have. In fact, I know people with disabilities who supported Connor Lamb and who supported Kenyatta in Pennsylvania. But then they had
to,
going to
vote for Oz too. Let's be fair.
Yeah, and vote for Oz too. Yeah, and maybe McCormick, or or whatever, or even Doug Mastriano. They wound up having to do overtime for something the Fetterman campaign should have done. That's unfair to the disability community, because the Fetterman campaign didn't do their due diligence in informing people about disability.
Yeah, Eric Garcia joining us. This goes to a bigger problem in society, but this is a really good example of it. I get it. When something gets on TV and it goes viral on social media, people that are in certain groups, they want to use that moment to get their messaging out. I don't know that a political campaign with Fetterman, with his condition and his stroke and all this, I'm not sure this is a good avatar for the disability community and or the national conversation on disabilities. Yeah. Now, I know that's harsh to say, but I'm, as somebody that cares about these issues, I don't think this is a really good avatar for folks, because there's a couple layers that you got to pick through, like we're doing, and those don't fit on tweets, and those don't fit on sound bites, and those don't fit on podcasts.
Yeah, well, like, this is why I say that I'm not a fan of debates, like, generally. I mean, there's a reason why losing candidates always demand more debates or candidates that are in the red tend to demand debates, because they want to get on TV. They want to have that snappy soundbite. I think that I understand why, and I tweeted this before. I tweeted this a few weeks ago. That's what landed me on my tweets on Tucker Carlson. My mom was proud of that, by the way. But
Tucker was against his tweets, just for those of you from Logan that aren't keeping track of the score there. That was not a good thing for him, but we've been laughing about it.
Yeah, we've been laughing. We've had fun with it. I think that I understand. So, like, I understand why the disability community wanted to discuss this. I think it's important. And I also think that like Politico said, like, most people don't talk about ableism. Well, that's, that was malpractice for Politico to say that, in the playbook, because then it's kind of our job to, I think it's our job to talk about ableism, but I
define it for people. I hate to interrupt you, but before we go any further, define it, because I saw a whole bunch of people that have no clue what it is.
And again, I should say that that I'm speaking in the broadest terms, and there are plenty of people who have subgroups. Ableism is essentially discrimination against people with disabilities simply because they are disabled. And because a lot of people with disabilities believe in the social model of disability, they believe that oftentimes it is society that disables people as much, if not more, than the actual disability or the impairment. That's not, a lot of them don't, that's not to say that, that's not to erase the real difficulties that people with disabilities have. A lot of them are the biggest advocates for their own health care, because God knows the medical system doesn't really think of them that much. But it's to say that oftentimes society is just discriminatory. So let's put that out there. But I think that it's always tough when you make a political candidate, especially when there's just one political candidate who's disabled, into the forefront and talking about it, because then it's really hard to parse out what is ableism versus what is just the slings and arrows of campaigning. So I understand why people want to defend him, and I understand why people with disabilities think that the general coverage was noxious, and a lot of it was. But I think that this is just, especially 2 weeks out from the campaign, especially in the context of a lot of this debate, that's been intensely personal. This campaign is one of I'd say it's the ugliest one in the in the country.
Saying something this cycle.
Yeah, God, it's inherently dicey. So so on one hand, I understand it. On the other hand, I'm like, okay, it's really, really tough, because I don't want, I should say, I want to judge Fetterman. It's as if Fetterman or Oz gets in there. I'm going to judge him by his merits. And like if Fetterman is walking the halls and has a captioning device when I'm asking him questions, that doesn't bug me. And I'll still ask him, how are you going to vote on this thing? Now I might take him to a quiet place, like, where he can listen to the captioning just because I have that, understanding. But like, I'm still going to give him a heart, but like, but then like, I'm going to be like, okay, we're in a quiet place. You don't have an excuse, and in the same way, if Oz is, walking the halls, I'm going to ask him questions, so I think that it's always difficult whenever people tie a candidacy to a larger issue, as you said, like him becoming an avatar. So that's the really difficult part, I think.
Yeah, Eric Garcia. Let's just go there with that part of it, because here's the other problem.
Yes.
For the average person in real life, my rule with disabilities, in fact, we just had a meeting. They had a peer group thing with the VA about 2 weeks ago. We just hashed this out. It's like, you accommodate the disability and then you figure the rest of it out later. In the moment, just accommodate it as best you can. And sometimes I understand sometimes folks like, well, people abuse it. Like, okay, but let somebody else figure that part out. Like, you just accommodate the disability as best you can and move on and keep things moving and keep people respected. And that's how you deal with it. But that's in person. Online, you're in the news media. I'm in the media business. I'm in the opinion business. You report facts as best you can. People that are just tweeting or doing Facebook posts, how do we talk about this better? Because that face-to-face interaction goes away, and I try to pretend like Twitter's face-to-face. That's how I try to police myself a little bit.
I try to, even if.
But how do they do it? Because because a lot of people, look, this is new to a lot of people.
This is new.
The things we've learned about the spectrum, which was in your book, a lot of that stuff's 2030s. I mean, this stuff's all new. What we know about strokes now, you just mentioned it. We're going to have candidates, if not this cycle, really soon, with more and more disabilities in Congress, in the Senate, in state houses, and we got a bunch in the legislatures already.
Governorships.
We got to learn how to talk about this stuff. And throwing ableist at somebody over a political opinion is damaging to everybody. We don't want to do that. How do people need to talk about this in a better way?
I think a lot of it is, so it's funny because, you say a lot of people don't know this. So like roughly a quarter, if we're to believe CDC numbers, roughly a quarter of Americans have a disability, something like 26%. And that's not counting people with disabilities who don't consider themselves part of the disability community. The way I think we discussed it is by looking, but recognizing that we don't know the full context of everybody's experience. Like I was thinking, like some people got on my friend Sarah Luderman, and you and I have been talking about getting her on the show because like some people got cross with her when she made some comment about disability. She's like, and then people didn't realize that she's disabled herself. And then like she's like, I don't have to put everything in my Twitter bio, a lot of times people in my mentions, a lot of parents are like, my favorite is when they say like, well, you shouldn't use autistic person. You should say person with autism. That's what parents say. I'm like, I'm autistic, So let's recognize that we don't know the full context of everything. And let's also recognize that just like, I understand, I believe in the idea of cross-disability solidarity, and because a lot of people with disabilities have more than one disability, and one often gives way to the other, or gives way to another oftentimes. And eventually, if we're fortunate enough to get old, in our old age, we will become disabled, if we don't die young. But I think that's so, as important as that is, it's also important to recognize that a person affects their disability as much as the disability affects their person, so to speak. And I think it's also important to recognize that each disability is individual and everybody's experience is individual, and that there's a lot that even when, so like I'm very, obviously, I wrote a whole book about it. I'm very open about a lot of my disability. There are also parts of it that are nobody's business but my own. And I think that's the other part that we have to recognize, that we are only seeing a tiny version of ourselves on social media. It is a curated version. And in politics, that is juiced up, because politicians by nature curate parts of themselves that they think are the most palatable to the public.
Yeah, Eric Garcia joined us, and just real quick to kind of put a little bit of bow on it, it works the other way, because I talk to
Yes.
these folks, and you've done this when you research your book, because you went in these folks' houses. Like, there's people the other way where that's all they talk about on their social media is their disability, because they don't talk about it in their real life, and it's not their biggest issue, but they're using that for messaging. This goes both ways, because some of that messaging stuff where you're trying to get it out there and you're trying to get awareness, that doesn't mean they want it 24 hours a day in their home life either, because they're still trying to live their normal lives as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I often say is that, like, tweeting doesn't make you an expert on disability. Like, you actually have to do, like, uh, um, I understand, like, especially when you get a diagnosis or when you are newly joined part of a community and it's kind of the fervor of a convert. Um, but I also feel like there is a way to talk about, because to your point, a lot of people with disabilities say, yes, this is an inherent part of me and I need you to see this. And I believe that. Like, I believe that we need to see people's disability, not just say, like, oh, look past it. I think we need to acknowledge it and recognize this is a part of them. At the same time, I think that, like, what a lot of people with disabilities say is that, yes, this defines me, but I'm also, so, like, one of the things I say is, like, yeah, autism's a very big part of, like, it determines what time of the day I get on the train. Because if I get on the train when there's too many people or there's too many buzzing, no, just no. But at the same time, I also want to do work. Like, I was very adamant uh, when I started writing about autism, when I wrote that first piece for National Journal, and then when I wrote my book, that I was going to go back to work. That my day job has very little to do with disability. I write a column for MSNBC about disability. For the most part, I just write about politics, and I'm happy to do that until somebody tells me I suck and I can't do it anymore. I think that's the other part of it, is that people with disabilities also want to be judged on their merits. They don't want, plenty of people want it acknowledged, want it accommodated, and then want to be treated like everybody else. So I think that generally, again, this is the point that I want to make, is that campaigns are inherently difficult. It's inherently difficult to make a campaign your avatar for talking about larger things, because like, I guarantee you in 3 days nobody's going to be talking about that. Like, or once the election's over, nobody's going to be thinking about this one way or the other. And I worry that, just the same way that kind of parachuting in by a lot of people who don't understand it, a lot of reporters who are just parachuting in to do it, as soon as they leave, that doesn't do them any service either, because a lot of people with disabilities aren't going to have that. So I think that if there's anything that the media can do with this, there's anything the press can do, it's to use this opportunity to build and cultivate those relationships, and check in on them like you do any other sources, and so that when this happens again in the future, because you said this will happen again, we don't just all bull rush it in, but there will be people with the knowledge and the community sources, the community trust, and the building. Like one of the things that I said is that, like, don't get me wrong, I love Amanda Morris, I love Sarah Luderman, I love those people. But it's rough that they're the ones who have to go on the front lines whenever this stuff happens, because a lot of non-disabled reporters just aren't doing the work. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, which is why we bring you on, because
Yeah.
I could have called a lot of people. I first person I DM, I was like, "You and me going to talk about this?" You're like,
We're
"Yep,
going to
let's
talk
go."
about this. Yeah.
But I think this is important to disclose. And I don't want to talk out of school, but because we're always talking about this. Like I
Yeah.
text you or DM you and like, "Hey, how do I handle this? What do we discuss about that?" Like that's the background when you're talking about parachuting in. Talking about tough issues is like developing a sports skill or a craft skill or anything else. You've got to do some reps to get good at it.
Yeah,
And if
you
we're
do.
going to talk about these tough issues, we can't just parachute in on it. You need to have some contacts that have disabilities. You need to have those perspective things. And that's something we work really hard. Sometimes we fail. We say we're wrong and we're wrong on
Yeah.
our show. But this isn't something I just woke up this morning and said, I'm going to cover disability. I've been doing it. And you've been doing it. And that's important.
You and I talked about it. And it's like, I think that one of the best pieces about this was the New York Times piece that Maggie Astor, who I know she had some mental health issues, but like, I don't know if she's physically disabled or anything. I can't say, like, I'm not going to be the judge, but like, because, she's built those sources, and she has that trust so that she knew who to call once the debate was over. So if there's anything good that could come out of this, it's reporters building those sources and building, just like you do in cultivating any other beat, so that when this stuff comes up again, we're not having this frenzy that really just, my whole feeling when this whole thing happened was, and my feeling about this is like, whenever disabilities in the news, I'm like, again, and I think I've tweeted that a few times, just like seeing how it's being discussed, and I'm like, we're doing this again,
Yeah.
So I think if there's anything good that comes out of it, I hope it's that.
Yeah, we learn about people when you have a viral story like that, when you have a crisis like that. You saw who was scattershot and didn't know what they were talking about real quick, and those are the things you need to mark and pay attention to, and then figure out who does know, because whether they did their homework in crisis because they don't have time to go look it up. They just got to react to it. That's why I'm talking about. You don't have to be a reporter for this. Like, just as a news media consumer, this is what you should be. You should have a basic working knowledge on certain things so that you don't get sideswiped and you lose your bearing and don't know where to go on a tough story. And then, by the way, you notice I didn't do this show yesterday, the day after it happened. I waited a day. Why?
Yeah. No,
I wanted to put my own thoughts together on it, even because I had a strong reaction. I'm like, nope, I'm going to wait, let it breathe, then we'll talk about it.
That was the thing because I knew I had a strong reaction to it. And what I did is I kind of cooled down. And then what I did is I listened to people who I know are more knowledgeable about me. A lot of people, because like my dad, God bless my dad, he says like, well, you're kind of an expert about this stuff. Like he was talking about this when I was back home, not about this, but about something else, this disability stuff. And I was like, and it was funny to me because it was just like, God, I am not I wrote a book about it, but like, I still try to read as much as I can and consume as much as I can about it. And that was why I was real glad that you gave me a day, and I tried to read as much as I could and listen to as many people as I could. And I think to your point, like there was missed opportunity after missed opportunity. I want there to, and if there's anything good, but if there's, again, this is my Christian school upbringing, what man intended for evil, God intended for good, if there's anything good that comes of it, I hope that it's that more reporters build sources or see people with disability on the news media talking about this, and then know, hey, I know I should probably call Maria Town, or I should call Rebecca Coakley, I should call Julia Bascom, or I should call, any of these other people, any of these other folks, or Andrew Pulrang, or email Alice Wong or something, So.
Eric Garcia. That's why we talk about this tough stuff with you, man. I appreciate your insight. Another tough topic. One of these days, we'll just talk about ice cream or something. We just did pie with RJ the other day. I'll get you on for
Yeah.
something easy for 10 minutes. Tell people where they can find the book. You do a column for MSNBC, your day job. You write all kinds of stuff for the Independent, Congressional Reporter. You're going to be busy the next couple of weeks, and especially in
God
the
help
spring.
me.
Enjoy your Christmas, because that might be the last time you breathe until probably April or May.
No, I'm looking forward to it because, like, my mom, I talked about this. My mom, like I say that, like, my mom worked in Macy's, for a long time, and so, like, I knew from like middle of November to like the beginning of January, I wouldn't see my mom that much, like a lot, just because she she was making everybody else's season merry and bright while she was busy, and like But now that she's out of the retail business, I get to spend Christmas with her, so I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Eric M. Garcia. I think that what I want to say with the disability community is, I spent a lot of time covering it. If people listen to this, I hope that they correct me where I'm wrong, and I hope that I did a good job summarizing what I've heard, because I've just been trying to hear what people have told me, and I hope I did a good enough job. So, that's what I was trying to do. So.
You rarely regret gaining more knowledge and using a little empathy. And
Yeah.
especially on tough issues like this, that's what we do. Eric Garcia, you're the best. We will link to all this stuff. We're going to link to some of the pieces we discussed too. Suderman did a Twitter thread that I sent out. She wasn't talking politics at all, just straight disability stuff that got some people worked up. We're going to link to stuff like that. Do your homework on this thing, because you need to read a lot of different viewpoints on this stuff.
Yeah, Sarah, like, I really hope that she said that it's tentative, but I really wanted to get you on the show. So.
Yeah, I hope so. Eric Garcia, you're the best, my friend. Thank you for the time, sir.
Now let me see you go off like a bomb.
And that'll do it for Heard Tell. As always, love to hear from you. heardtellshow@gmail.com. You can send us an email, Heard Tell Show on the Twitter. You can DM us and follow us there. Also, my Twitter handle, for the Fire, and those of our guests is always in the lower third graphics. If you're watching on the YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, there'll be links for you to follow both the writing of the folks we have on and us and our social media. This only works because you listen, and we so greatly appreciate you. So wherever you are, across the street or around the world, we hope you and yours are well. We hope you are well fed. We can't wait to see you again for more Heard Tell. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la